Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Plus podcast, which is going to be very informative this time. This episode is, I will admit, very UK-centric in its topic, but I think the issues we discuss are pretty universal. Very much about cities, very much about the transitioning our transportation away from, certainly away from fossil fuels, possibly also away from private vehicles clogging up the streets. What alternatives are there? And so today I'm talking to a really lovely man called Balazs Csuvár, who works for an organisation called DG Cities. Loads of links he sent me that are in the description in this for this video. And I'm very excited to get the chance to talk to him. He's a really lovely man. And we discuss a huge, wide range of topics, very, very specifically related to charging your vehicle in cities, transportation in cities, the role of local governments and citywide authorities in installing the power and the charging infrastructure for their vehicle fleets, all that stuff. Really, really interesting stuff. But before we launch into that glorious conversation, I just want to let us allow a quick mention from our sponsor, My Energy, because they do such a brilliant job. They're developing such important technology for this transition, and we're really proud to be associated with them in any way and hugely grateful to receive the sponsorship that we do to keep this podcast going. And so here is a little message from My Energy. My Energy is putting the I back into British innovation. My Energy is putting the I back into inventing the future. My Energy is putting the I back into inspiring a nation. Recharging the world with green, smart energy. Charge your EV with your PV and more. Visit myenergy.com and help to spark the green revolution. My Energy, driving the charge to a greener future. Okay, let's dive straight in. Please welcome onto the Fully Charged Plus podcast, Balázs Csuvár. So Balázs, thank you so much for joining us today. This is a very pertinent topic. I think what we're going to be talking about is peculiar to the United Kingdom, but it actually applies anywhere in the world, really. The same problems that we're facing with electric vehicles and charging them in cities and using electric vehicles in cities. It's a kind of universal problem with, I've seen different approaches around the world, but it's certainly one that's right at the forefront in the UK at the moment. And so that, I know that's the area you're working on, but can you give me a sort of brief rundown of what DG Cities is and what it does and why it exists, just to kind of give a bit of background on what you do?
Sure, of course. And thank you very much for kind of having me. DG Cities was set up about 5-6 years ago as the smart city innovation company of the Royal Borough of Greenwich in London. The remit of the organization is to do a bit more exciting research and innovation in kind of any field which would be kind of classified as smart cities, really. We have done projects on electric vehicles very recently, quite a number of them, but also autonomous vehicles and various other topics in the smart city space. So smart heatings, digital connectivity, and always with the focus of how technology can actually help people have better lives, or how can technology help to solve certain urban problems. So we're not a company that develops technology. We are one that tries to understand it and then tries to bring it into people's lives and then implement it.
Right, because Greenwich has been in the news. Just for people outside, a lot of people who listen to this show are outside the UK, but just to point out that Greenwich, which is a borough in southeast London. I used to live there, in fact, many, many years ago. I lived in Greenwich for a year. It was lovely. But there's been quite a lot of news particularly about autonomous vehicles. So there's been quite a few sort of schemes running to try out autonomous vehicles and see how people react and all that stuff for quite some time. I mean, that, a few years ago that was happening, wasn't it? So it seems to be at the forefront of this sort of innovation.
Absolutely. I think it started with a trial which was called Gateway, which was in 2017, 2018,
right,
which was an autonomous shuttle going around the O2 and Greenwich Peninsula. And then since then, we have been involved in quite a number of them. Greenwich saw it as one of those interesting areas where there might be solutions might come out for urban transport problems. There are pockets of Greenwich which are not as well connected as some others, so there might be solutions for mobility services to then use autonomous vehicle technologies. Right. And it was considered as something which could be interesting and definitely something to be at the forefront of, because that also allows the borough and allows us to try and also shape how technology is being implemented, so that it's not going to be only focusing, for instance, on private autonomous vehicles, but also something that looks at ride sharing, looks at mobility as a service, looks at buses, that sort of stuff. Yeah. That's why Greenwich got involved in it, and that's why we have created the Smart Mobility Living Lab, which is an urban testbed for autonomous vehicles. It's one of the key research areas within the UK to test autonomous vehicles in urban settings.
Yeah.
And we have done various trials, just a trial a few months ago, to try and understand what people think about autonomous vehicles and how they would react to them, but also what we can do to build confidence, build trust in this technology.
Yeah, because it is such I'm just sort of going back to the time that I lived in Greenwich, that I used to cycle to Bermondsey where I worked every day. That was my commute. And it was now I wouldn't do that now. And it was a really easy ride. It's a flat road. You're not going up any hills or anything. It was very nice and easy. But the traffic then was, incredibly intense. And I'm talking late 1970s. When I did that, and now it's I don't even know how it's busy, and that that sort of the challenge of moving around. I think particularly in London, because London has grown from probably 300 villages that surround it, that it now engulfs, into one huge. It is big. Yeah. I think, for people who haven't been to London from other countries, the one thing you can say about London, it's big. Well, it's the only mega city in Europe. When I heard that, I went, oh my God. Because you sort of think London, Berlin, Paris, Rome, Amsterdam, they're the same. Well, they are the same, except London is 5 times bigger than any of them. It's just huge.
Yeah,
and that is a massive challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, 10 million people and all the people around kind of trying to move in and move around. Yeah. So it is like, bigger than many countries, really.
Yes, yeah. But then, because this is the kind of discussion that is going on at the moment. So there's an enormous amount of discussion of people, and this is not negative comments about electric vehicles or the electrification of transport. It's people who want to positively change. I would love an electric car, but I live on a street with the no off-street parking in Greenwich, and how can I charge a car? All those, I'm sure you've heard them, we're very aware of them. And, it's very easy for me to say, as someone who can park a car off the street, oh, well, it's not that hard using public charging. And there's so many people that I meet people all the time who go, I can't charge my car on my street, but I use it and it's fine, But it's a hard thing. It's a hard sell to convince people. But then I think equally what is harder is why have you got a car if you live in a city? That was the first thing. I moved to London and I owned a car, and the first thing I did was get rid of the car, because I was like, where am I going to put it? I can't use it. I only would use it to get out of London. That was the only reason I would drive out of London. That's to see my parents who lived outside, or whatever it would be. And I got rid of a car, and it was a lot easier. Life was a lot easier without one in London. But I could, for me, with the work I was doing and how I lived. But that's a really hard one to say until there is a sort of, really a better system of car sharing. And I have seen this in some cities. We've recently seen it in Utrecht. But to convince people that that's a viable alternative is a harder sell than, look, we'll put a charger on your street, so you can charge your car. I mean, what I'm eventually getting at is these are the topics that you're living with day to day. This is grist to your mill, as we say.
Yeah, no, very much so. London wants to be as car free, I think, as it can. The mayor's transport strategy sets out that 80% of all journeys should be made by active travel or public transport by about 2040, which leaves very few trips for vehicles, and the number of vans and businesses really traveling around London will probably eat up that 20%, which means that people going to work or people going to a restaurant or anything like that should just be using public transport or walking and cycling. But that is definitely what London is trying to get to. But within this, the city is also trying to accommodate the electrification of all vehicles.
Yeah.
So that if people actually do have a car, or if they are making some of the journeys with a vehicle, then they could do that with an electric one. And I think that is something that the city is really, really trying to encourage and really trying to see how it can enable. But it is a really nice challenge. Currently, I think London has about 1.5% of its vehicles electric.
Right.
For it to get to 100%, it will need to build a lot of EV charging points. I mean, the city has recently published its draft strategy on EV chargers, and it's predicting that in a very, very optimistic scenario, it might have about 49% of all vehicles electric by 2030.
Right.
And it would need about 60,000 charging points for that.
Yeah.
And that is a huge kind of jump.
Yeah.
I think in the UK, there are currently about 30,000 charging points. So you would need to double that just in London. And that means building multiple charging points every single day within the city for the next eight years.
Yeah. Yes, and every corner you walk around, you should see people installing 20 rapid chargers. That's, in a way, that's how it is. It's a huge challenge. And I mean, so realistically then, I mean, because that is a very easy argument for people who don't want to change what they're doing now. So, for instance, a wealthy family in West London who might have two cars that they park on the street, petrol cars, and to convince them, look, why don't you not have two cars and use a car sharing service? I would love to suggest it to someone in a Range Rover who lives in Notting Hill. A wealthy suburb of West London, to go, why don't you use that very small electric car sharing scheme instead of your 3.5-ton diesel Range Rover?
I think many of the second cars are likely transitioning to electric first.
Yes,
and then
actually, to be fair, just very quickly, the area where you see the most electric cars parked on the street, is Notting Hill. But they're always parked between Range Rovers. It's Range Rover, Leaf, Range Rover, BMW i3.
Yeah.
But that's, that is a minority anyway of the population in London. I mean, do you know those sort of statistics? Like the majority of residents, of the 10 million residents of Greater London, what percentage of them own a private car? It's probably less than we think, than I would assume.
I looked into it a little bit, and I think the estimates are about 2.8 million vehicles in London. And that's for about the sort of 10 million people.
10 million people, right.
It depends where you live in London. The more central you live, the least likely it is that you will have a vehicle. And then some of the outer boroughs, which are much more suburban, where there's no tube connection or there are only bus connections, you will see a higher proportion of car users and car owners.
Yeah.
But it's also an interesting thing, because some of those people might not be using the vehicles too much. I think you mentioned it on your show as well, that many of the vehicles are actually parked a lot.
Oh, for 90% of the time, yeah.
And then some of the vehicles that should be electrified first really are the ones which are being used a lot, because if you manage to change like an Uber vehicle or a taxi or one of the white vans or a bus, then you are making a much bigger impact on pollution and on climate change and on everything than to try to electrify a vehicle which only does a few thousand miles a year.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely right. Which is, I absolutely agree. But then, one of the questions that often gets raised by people who I just want to cover this area quickly because I know it's a hot topic for us, but a question that's raised constantly is, who do I get in touch with in my borough or wherever I live in whichever city to try and get electric vehicle charging installed in my neighborhood? I mean, because there isn't one answer, I'm assuming.
And I think this is the fascinating kind of question, really, and I think what will be very important for the next decade, because all the charging points that you see in cities, especially, and mainly the public ones, they have been put in with national government and local government funding.
Yeah.
And so they have been paid by your local council, essentially, or the government.
By us as taxpayers, eventually. Yeah.
Exactly. And they have been allocated at the locations which were deemed right at the time, and they have probably been influenced by people who had electric vehicles and said, "Oh, I would like something nearby." But that will not work with all vehicles being electric. No. I think we just said, like, from 1% of vehicles being electric to jumping to 50 and 100%, you need a completely different system and a completely different strategy for it, because you cannot put a charging point in front of every house, basically, in any city, and in London either, because that would just clog up the city. You would have so much street clutter, basically.
Yes.
Just charging points after charging point.
Yeah.
So there definitely needs to be a shift in where these points are located, and also in who pays for the installation of them. I think the public sector have done a really good job at starting it and starting to install chargers. But what is being expected is that the private sector will start to take over and start to actually provide all these tens of thousands of charging points without necessarily so much taxpayer support, because there is already a market for it, and there will be a bigger and bigger market for it.
Yeah.
And I think this is where the role of local authorities might change and might shift a little bit from being the ones who commission all the EV charging point installs to actually seeing how they can enable many more installs, and how they can use some of the legislative or some of the kind of property ownership that they have to try and see how they can actually enable charging points to be built. And I think that will also help with a shift of going from some of the 3 kilowatt lamppost charging points and shifting towards the much bigger kind of charging hub sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Because those are just potentially much more efficient infrastructure, because they can be used, every day, but not only once or twice a day, but actually once or twice every half an hour.
Yeah.
And provide many more chargers. And then again, there's a question of where you put them, because London is super dense, so you can't put them everywhere. You need to put them at locations where people travel by, or at places where people go to, like supermarkets, cinemas, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it is that thing that, once it's a fascinating psychological journey. So I've been saying for about the last 3 or 4 years, the problems with electric cars are emotional and psychological, not technological. And that doesn't mean to say the problems don't exist. They really do exist. I completely understand that, because it's different. But in actual real life, someone now who's got a small petrol car that they use for the thing, taking the children to school, doing shopping, going to the doctors, going on errands, visiting relatives, that car does 29, maybe 35 miles a day on average, if you average it out, which would mean you'd need to charge a modern electric car maybe once a week, which is just the same as going to the petrol station once a week.
Exactly. And you probably go to the supermarket once a week.
While you're charging your car, you can do the shopping. So you do the two things at once. I mean, I think that is the solution, but I think that will emerge. And I think it's a really important sort of piece of history that I've observed over the last 11 years of driving electric cars is that I was always slightly concerned when a council put in two rapid chargers, and this isn't just London, this is all over the country, at maybe the library car park, which was next to the town hall and next to the council offices and the social services, and they put it there because they could then get a photograph of the mayor standing by it to say, we've installed new green chargers. And no one used it because they couldn't find it. I found one in a town in the borders of Scotland. It took me about an hour, and I got out of the car and walked. I knew it was there, and I eventually found it, and it was round the back of toilets that were at the back of a library. It was like secret. It was publicly available. I used it. I eventually went back, got the car, drove to it, plugged it in. And you just think there's not been a lot of intelligent planning installing that. And that was a classic one where it was basically for PR for the local council. And I do think we've moved past that now. And you're absolutely right. There's got to be commercial companies that are doing it. That's what it's got to be. And one thing that's come up in conversation recently, which I would love you to communicate to councils to see how the council shouldn't put it in, they shouldn't pay for it, but they should have legislation passed that allows them to fine the operators if those charge points aren't working. That's that's the next step that I want to see happen. We've put in these beautiful charge points. Well, they're not working, and when you ring the number, no one answers, and they're not working, so they're pointless. So it's a waste of money. And if if that company was fined, then they would make that charger work much more.
Yes, and what I think is exactly that. Councils are really good at some of the things that they are doing, but they were not set up to be EV charge point companies.
No.
Probably 10 years ago, none of them installed any. So they don't have the people, and they don't necessarily have the budgets allocated even to do that. And London has over 30 boroughs, for instance. So even within London as a whole, you could have 32 strategies for everybody to install charging points in different ways and install different charging points, which again doesn't help with interoperability. And if you are in one borough and not in the other, maybe you can't pay because you need a different card. So that sort of thing needs to be addressed. And I think that's why it's important for any town or city or any local authority to understand what they need to actually be doing. And I think the installation of a couple of charging points was really useful because it showed that the city is looking at it. It is aware of this problem, but then now there is the challenge of actually getting the private sector to step up. But that's something that in London, for instance, we have not really seen that much because most of the charging points are still funded and financed by the public sector. So I think that is one of the things that needs to be solved for it to really kind of go up in the number of charge points. And I think there will be roles for a council because charging also needs to be very equitable. And then there might be areas which are kind of sexy, and then a private operator or a private company will quite quickly put in a few charging points there. But there might be some other really hidden or areas or ones where the business case maybe doesn't stack up just quite.
Yeah.
Where I think a council will need to step up and say, okay, we're going to put some charging points here because we would like these people to also, be able to buy an electric vehicle and use that and use cheaper, kind of access the cheaper operational costs. So I think there will be much more of a balancing that council will need to do.
Yeah, and I think in a way the thing I would prefer to see first, which a lot of people who own electric vehicles who live in cities will be annoyed at, is for the council transport yard, so the bus depot, the waste disposal depot, the council vans, that to have all that electrified, as exactly as you've said. And I mean it is happening. So I very briefly visited a bus garage in West London, and I hadn't seen this before, but it was it was in the middle of the day, loads of buses out. There were 2 buses charging when I went to see it. but the row of chargers was breathtaking. And this is fairly central. This is Notting Hill, in fact. Just a row of huge chargers, not like you would use for cars. They're obviously built for the buses. And I went, oh my God, that has gone in the last 5 years. I didn't even know. And I'm in that world where I sort of hear that sort of news, because there's a lot of electric double-decker buses doing their routes. But that infrastructure installation is a huge challenge. I know this from talking to people at the national grid or the local grid operator, to provide that power to those locations, which were designed to have diesel buses. That's what that was built as. That's where you park all your diesel buses and you fill up at this pump here, which was, that was what we're used to. And this change is quite a big challenge for everyone involved, to make that. Is that an area that you would deal with, is securing the supply for the infrastructure, let alone the actual charging box and the wire?
Yeah, that is exactly what I completely agree with that. I think the council fleets and then the public transport fleets should be something that can get electrified first, because many fleets, especially in London, but elsewhere in the country as well, they don't necessarily do that high mileage.
No.
Because you will have those vehicles so that an operative can go out and do something and fix something, go to a park and cut the grass, or go to a council housing estate and fix a boiler. And they are parked during those times, so the vehicle is not being driven up and down a motorway.
Yeah.
So these council fleets, because they don't do too high mileage, they can be already electrified, and most of the vehicles will be smaller cars, vans, minivans, where the market is becoming to provide alternatives to diesel vehicles. Loads, kind of capacity of how much a vehicle can carry, is a question, because some of these vehicles are carrying wood and plasterboards and whatnot, so they need to be able to kind of actually carry those and still do the same mileage. But those vehicles can be electrified. And then you have the really big vehicles, the refuse collection ones, the gritters. And I think there is also a lot of technology innovation going into that space.
Yeah.
But those vehicles are hugely expensive for now.
Yeah.
But they will also become electric pretty soon, and then councils can be replacing those. But they definitely need the budget for it, because these vehicles are still often kind of many times more expensive, like a refuse collection vehicle, which is fully electric. They will have a 300 kilowatt battery. Greenwich has about 45 of them. So you can imagine that's about 1.5 megawatts of battery stuff that you are putting into a yard.
Right. Oh, wait a minute. But has Greenwich got 45 battery electric dustbin trucks now?
No, they have 45 refuse collection vehicles,
they have
which will
45
all be
diesel ones now. Right.
Yeah, which will all be electrified, and they'll have to be electrified within the next 5 to 8 years.
Yeah.
And that's true for everywhere in the country.
Yeah.
And I think that will be something that authorities will be doing. And I think that also shows a really good example to the people, because, if my refuse collection vehicle can be electric, there's no good reason for me not to be able to go in an electric car to do my weekly shopping.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's also potentially enabling some of the public charging network to be built up, because what we are thinking about is that depots are often very constrained, either by space. So they are usually, if you have visited some depots, they're usually as crammed with vehicles as you can imagine. They are properly puzzled in, and then charging points might not fit, or the additional capacity of the substations might not fit.
Yeah.
So we are looking at ways of how you can actually take some of that need for depot-based charging out. And if people are going to always to the same location, whether you are able to charge there. So if you always go to the same estate, if you always go to the same parks, whether you would have charging points there. And also whether you need to charge vehicles every single day. You likely do not. So you don't need a charging point for every vehicle. You can get away with having one chargers. What we have been modeling with partners is that you can have 3 vehicles maybe charging on the same charging point, and then kind of schedule that smartly so that, vehicle A charges on Mondays and Thursdays,
Right. Yes.
and then the other one on Tuesdays, and then also, the smarter you get, you start checking how much people are actually using it, and then reallocate slots, and that's helping to reduce the need on the grid connections, which is also immediately making electrification cheaper, because the big costs are to pay the district network operator to bring in the really, really big cable to basically to the depot, and then supply.
No, I mean, that is the thing, is that if we could jump ahead 30 years, all the operating costs for a council as regards their transport would be reduced. We know that, but we've got to put it in first. All the costs up front. It's with all the new technologies, all renewable energy, electric vehicles, everything in that area. It's the cost is all up front, and the running costs. We've just been watching a big wind turbine being installed. And it's a huge financial, environmental cost putting that thing in. Great big, heavy-duty engineering, and the moment that they shut the door and it's running, and it's they shut the door at the bottom of the tower, everything's working, the blades are spinning. From that second onwards, that whole project gets cheaper and cleaner for the next 25 to 30 years. And all that cost, this particular design of wind turbine is really minimal maintenance costs. So the cost is all in the 95% of the entire cost of running it happened before it was switched on, and that's often the case with that stuff. But the one thing I was going to say, which I'm sure you've discussed, but it's coming to the fore slightly quicker in the United States at the moment, just because of the specifics of the vehicles, is school buses. I don't know if you've heard about this. So American school buses, which I don't have experience of. I have actually been at a friend's house and walked with their two kids to the end of the street so they could get on the school bus. So I've seen it happen once, the yellow bus. That was a long time ago. But there's a whole bunch of them been electrified in New York State, and they are bi-directional charging. So they're delivering power to the grid when they're not in use, which could be this huge system that in a city like London, if all the buses were electric, just let's go with the buses. I don't know how many buses there are, but thousands. And they could each deliver 10 kilowatt hours, not that much, sort of 25 miles range of the vehicle. That you could probably run the city on it for a couple of hours. It's that kind of level that when they're not in use, that's the thing. And then you charge them when the electricity is cheaper and when we've got more of it to more capacity. That whole side of it is on an individual. I have that at my house because I've got experimental equipment here, so I can theoretically run my house off my car. But, which is, I kind of think that's irrelevant until every house is doing it, and then it becomes a really big thing. And then if in cities, if all the council-owned traffic is capable of that, and we've just seen an example of the next level of technology that makes that a much cheaper option. Up to now, it's been a really expensive, and very specific to one type of charger. This is type 2. This is how you plug a car in the street, and a lamppost charger. It's that level. It just makes a huge difference. And we've just been in Utrecht, so I'm a bit obsessed with Utrecht at the moment because in the 1970s, Utrecht looked very like London. Loads of cars, loads of terrible, very high death toll of cyclists, loads of air pollution, kids. But they changed it back then. So they're going, we're going to just ease cars out of the city. And there's still cars in Utrecht. It's not car free. But about 90% of the population use bicycles. I mean, it's just a transformation. It's quiet. When you cycle, it's safe. No one wears helmets on bicycles. I didn't wear a helmet. I've always worn a helmet on a bike because I cycled in London. And you never knew. And I didn't wear a helmet. I felt completely safe because there was only other cyclists who are really, really good at avoiding you when you're a wobbly old British person. But, what a difference that city experience was. And Utrecht is the size of Greenwich. Let's be fair to London. It's a small city. It's not as big. But London could be utterly transformed with, that's the frustration I think that I've felt, the electric car part of this conversation is very new for me. I was a very keen cyclist and always thought, I just thought this doesn't work as a system. This many cars, trying to cram this many cars into what is essentially, underneath it all, a Roman city. I mean, it's really old. It's certainly a medieval city. The city streets, it's just not built for cars. It's an old city, and it's perfect for bicycles. And it's a mainly flat city. The weather is awful. I'll admit that. Like today, I would not want to go cycling today. But but how you shift, which I'm assuming is the kind of, the quietly spoken of shift that you're discussing in your organisation, is how on earth you start that change. And it is changing. I know, I accept that. The cycle path along the embankment in central London, amazing. That is wonderful. But what a big challenge.
No, absolutely. I mean, I can completely agree with that. I lived in Delft in the Netherlands for a year,
right,
doing my masters, and you just cycle everywhere, and then you don't really care. You can cycle from one side of the country to the other on completely safe cycleways. So that is something which they do, and kind of the Dutch do really, really well.
Yeah.
I think London is, and the rest of the UK as well, trying to catch up and trying to build lots of cycleways. I think the challenges definitely are the weather. I do live on a hill, so that is quite fun end of the journey for me. But that's but London is also quite large, and you need to kind of spend very big areas. But I think it is still very cyclable. I do like cycling here. But I think a lot of the transport which London experiences is actually delivery vans or tradespeople going about their business, and they need a vehicle because they are carrying something.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the bigger challenges for London to understand how that can be reduced, because that's something which you can't really put all of those on bicycles. I think people are quite good at, especially in central London, to use public transport, because that's just the fastest way. Like driving in central London is
better. Yeah,
is really just painful. But the further out you go, people are using cars.
Yeah.
Back to kind of your point on the vehicle to grid potential of large depots.
Yes.
I think what you mentioned in America. I think that's something that we are definitely interested in looking at. On the public charging level, kind of the sort of lamp columns and public chargers on the street and vehicles connecting to it. I think that would have a potential kind of very locally. And it's interesting because kind of Ofgem, the energy regulator, is trying to legislate or kind of regulate that charging points needs to be kind of smart charging points in the future, which would mean that you can get them to charge at certain times and not at other times. Yeah. And I think that will have a huge impact, because if electricity prices are very high, which means that if the demand is very high compared to the supply, then you would be able to tone down a bit the amount of charging which goes on in certain areas. And then also potentially feed back a little bit to the grid as well. So there's the smart charging, which is when you don't take anything from the grid when you shouldn't. And then there is the kind of trying to feed that back into your local network. And I think, as I said, you could be powering houses nearby. But then you have the large depots, and the large depots do have huge potential kind of dormant capacities over weekends or at night. I mean, the type of supply that you would need at a depot. Greenwich, again, back to an example, because we have worked with them quite a lot on this. They have about 500 local authority vehicles, which are all, which mainly stay in one depot. Some of them stay in other kind of satellite depots, or people take them home. But the majority of those vehicles, especially the really, really big ones, which drive the scale of it, really, they are in one depot. So you need about a 1.5 megawatt supply, which I've tried to look for comparisons. that's about as much as the Shard uses in London.
Yeah.
The Shard has that much capacity, and I think that's why it's difficult for the electricity kind of providers and operators to build this capacity. And because previously, like 10 years ago, if you told them that, okay, I need a lot of supply, I'm going to be building, Europe's biggest tower here. So, by the time I finish, you guys should finish as well.
Yeah.
That you could kind of see that working. Whilst now, if you want to put in, 20 rapid chargers somewhere, you can say, well, I would like the same amount of supply, and I would like to, have it by yesterday, please.
Yes.
Because I would like to start running a business on it. And if I put up the money, I cannot wait for 2 years for this connection to happen.
Yeah.
And this is where sort of coordination and the planning comes in, is because if we are putting these 60,000 charging points in London, let's say, and the 380,000 or so that is being predicted that the UK as a whole needs by 2030, you need that capacity to be available at the right places. And also, I think, and the National Grid has said many times, like, it's not going to be a problem. I think I agree. But what is a little bit of a challenge is to have that very quickly, approved build. And, if we are building more than a charger a day, potentially 10, 20, 30 chargers a day, you need that supply to be kind of available quite quickly. And therefore, you want to be coordinating across all the users, so that that's being built in a nice linear way rather than kind of here and there.
Yeah. No, it is. And I mean, also the other thing, which is a topic we've discussed on this series before, and we're about to do a lot more, is the engineers needed to install all those chargers, of which there is an enormous shortage.
Yeah.
So it's not only the chip shortage and the component shortage and the capacity. It's also the human, the actual skill shortage is another challenge, isn't it? So it's a big mountain to climb. I mean, in terms of private vehicle ownership in cities, all this information and the challenges ahead, I can't help but see, well, look, the only really plausible massive solution to this is that less people have private cars, and obviously if you live in a dictatorial state, if I ruled the world, I would ban private cars today, and everybody who wanted them would be sent to prison. No, I wouldn't. But how you encourage people to do that, the only way that I've seen that's plausible is that you show that the alternative is better.
Yeah.
Is far more economically sensible. If you need a car every day, it might not suit you, but if you need a car every now and then, it could be a really good solution. And if you very rarely use a car, then it's incredibly obviously the thing. And even I've talked to some people about, and one guy replied about this, because he was talking about he couldn't cope with an electric car. And I said, just keep a note of how often you actually drive. For real, not the distance, not anything like that, just how often you use the car. And he did email me a few weeks later and he said, I cannot believe it, I barely go in my car, which was his pride and joy. It was a classic car. It wasn't just a runabout, it was a car that he loved. And he doesn't use it, he uses the bus, the train,
Yeah.
Which is, but it's so it is a psychological thing. But how, that was the thing we saw in Utrecht, sorry, because I got very waylaid with the cycling, but was a car sharing scheme that the people who use generally after a year or so just get rid of their private car, because this is a better system. But it is a very beautifully run and organized system where there's cars all over the city, but I think they've got 60 Tesla Model 3s. So you can go for quite nice long range cars people go on holiday in, but there's also hundreds of Renault Zoes and Nissan Leafs and Hyundai Ioniqs. There's a range of cars that you can book very simply, and they've all got chargers. They're always charged when you take them back to where you got them from, and there's a charge point you plug in, which exists in London. There are electric zip cars, aren't there? But it's like every now and then I'll walk down a street in London and go, oh, there's an electric zip car. Whereas in Utrecht it was this entire street is electric cars with chargers. It's a huge increase. So using it is very, very easy and cheaper and more convenient than having your own car and having to. There's nowhere to park. You know, Utrecht as an ancient town, you know what Delft is very similar. Anyway, but to get to that point is a big mountain.
Yeah, no, definitely. And there, as you said, there are kind of zip cars, and they are electrifying their fleet, so there are more and more electric zip cars as well.
Yeah.
And they are convenient. I mean, I do not have a car. I use public transport, cycle, or when I need to, I do use a zip car. So
yeah,
I think it is possible. There are definitely some types of journeys and certain kind of ways people live where for them to adapt to it, that would be a change, and that would be a shift. And I think, as you said, that's something that we need to ensure that is easy. People often change transport modes when they move houses. So that's when you move a home, you kind of you check out, you survey what is around you, and try and understand how you can get to places. So that's usually a good place to get people to maybe change their behavior.
Yeah.
And also by providing them better options. People are smart, and people do realize that, okay, maybe I'm spending a lot of money on this asset which I'm not using.
Yes. Yeah.
And look around me, there are 3-4 other types of transport modes that I could be using, which are cheaper, and then make that shift.
But I mean, I think it is also generational. I think my generation of particularly men would find it quite, also the men I know would find it very challenging not to own a car because they believe the car says something about them. So there's this whole, and this is the kind of Top Gear universe, that a car is this, it's a statement, it's a fashion item, you're going, it's just 4 wheels on a box. I've never bought into that whole shtick, and I know, and it's ridiculous that I've ended up being involved in a show this about cars. But, much as I drive them and I love driving it, so I'm guilty as charged. But I think there is a generational shift. My son is a good example. He's in his late 20s, and only just very recently bought a car. He's been driving them, and he does car sharing and all that sort of stuff. But he has bought one recently. There is a key point. This is the important point that we did a show about car sharing in Berlin, a company called Car2Go. Hugely popular when we were there. I don't know how many years ago, quite a few years ago. And those were petrol and electric. They were just car sharing cars. And there was amazing statistics about a reduction in private vehicle ownership in Berlin and how many of these cars there were. You were never more than about 50 meters away from a Car2Go car, parked anywhere. That you got, the fuel cup, everything. It just was better. Everyone was using it. And then I met the guy that we interviewed in it a few years later at a conference, and he said it was going really well with a particular generation of people in their late 20s, sort of to their 40s. Huge, big uptake, and no one wanted a private car. They rode bikes, or they used that, or they public transport, or they used Car2Go. And then he said, one day I was walking through the rain and I noticed a woman walking the other way with a baby in a car seat and shopping, looking really angry. And she was looking for a Car2Go. And as soon as people had children, the wonderful independent young person's solution to transport just went out the window. He said suddenly there were a whole load of Volvos with car seats in them in the same suburbs where once there'd been bicycles and car sharing. So it does, it's not as straightforward as it might seem. And I'm sure you'll know.
And I think that's also very important to admit as well. Like, as you just gave in your example, like if you have children, and if the car can potentially provide that additional level of comfort that all the other modes, even combined, might not do. But I think there is still potentially, you could still have a vehicle. Ideally, you would have an electric one, and I think pretty soon you will have an electric one.
Yes,
and then use it for certain, and then use it for certain journeys. But for all the other journeys, you might be using something else.
Yeah,
and I think that is likely how it's going to pan out. The people will still have some people will have vehicles. They will use them maybe over the weekend to go somewhere, or there will be other better, even more flexible leasing options, renting options, where you rent a car for 3 days, 5 days, very easily available. Whilst kind of a lot of the zip car models are like you are using a vehicle for a couple of hours. which helps you with errands. It helps you with, to go somewhere, pick up something or anything like that, but not necessarily to spend a week with the vehicle.
Yeah.
And I think that if people will have these needs, there will be market solutions definitely which try and address it. And I think as a city, what you can do is try and facilitate them and try and understand where people have these needs and try and introduce them the options and actually kind of try and make the shift. I mean, autonomy is something that, this is why we got into it, because we saw it as a potential as well. Because, I mean, autonomous vehicles, the proper ones, let's call them, the ones that really drive themselves, they're a little bit down the road. But when they will be here, they will be hugely expensive at first. So the way to use them will be through a ride-sharing service. You order one, you go somewhere, and then the vehicle kind of just drives away and picks someone up. And I think that can also be more efficient to having almost multiple sizes kind of vehicles which kind of can take you in the very kind of end of your journeys, but maybe kind of minibuses that can kind of quickly take you to a train station or to a tube stop, and then kind of really big ones which can go quite quickly between various hubs, so to say. So I think there will be more and more of these options emerging as well, and autonomy can be one of the things that helps it. Maybe it helps with the economics, maybe it helps with safety, and that's sort of where we are focusing on, is because it is going to be making vehicles safer, because a lot of the accidents happen due to human error, and a lot of those accidents can be prevented by a vehicle being constantly attentive. There are, of course, many other driving scenarios where humans are really good at. We have actually just done a research project on this, because humans are great at dealing with unexpected stuff. Like if a couch fell off a lorry in front of you on a motorway, you would know it's a couch, and you would know that, okay, I'm not going to go through it. I'm going to try and stop or swirl around. But an autonomous vehicle would need to kind of immediately understand that, okay, that's a couch. It's going to be falling down. It's going to be rolling on its side, and it's going to look anything but like a couch. But the vehicle would still need to make a decision on what to do. And we have just been doing a project where we are asking people kind of what has been the weirdest thing that ever happened to you on the road, so that we can put it into a library and then basically create a simulation from it. We're working with great partners. It's called a project called De-Risk, where they create a simulation from it, and then that's then being used to train and test autonomous vehicles. So you can basically have a driving license test where your most random driving scenario will be one of the things that an autonomous vehicle will need to kind of pass through to be stamped.
I've got to tell you my... it's really important. I just can't help, because we need to wind up soon, but I can't help, because the one I've seen, I'm just trying to keep it as clean as possible, which was the weirdest thing I've ever seen on a motorway. So I was driving on a motorway in the north of England, sunny day, and I was overtaking a van which had sliding doors. And I noticed that I thought it was like overheating, because there was liquid coming out of the van, squirting out of the van. And as I got closer, I did pull over a little bit to keep my distance. The gentleman who was driving the vehicle had maneuvered himself so that his left foot was on the accelerator. He would have been doing about 65 miles an hour, his hand on the steering wheel, and he'd twisted his body so that he could urinate out of the door as he was traveling.
Oh, wow.
That's not something you see every day.
No, we do not have that. We have lots of pheasants and deer running out in front of people, but yeah.
Yes, that was it is it's such a difficult one, isn't it? Because that was a very good example. There was a lovely young girl who worked on a TV show I did, who we were filming in Scotland. She was born and raised in a city, and she was driving the minibus with people in, and she swerved one morning quite dangerously to miss a pheasant on the road. And I said that, we had a sort of talk about it because people got a bit upset. And I said, look, it's really unfair that people are She was a vegan. This is a very important point. She was a vegan. So she didn't want to kill the bird. And I said, honestly, I've grown up in the country and lived there all my life, and you drive at a pheasant, they'll get out of the way. Just ignore it. It's fine. They know to move. Don't swerve the car. That's dangerous when it's full of people. And she went, okay, I'm really sorry. And then the next morning when I got to work, she was in tears because she'd driven along. There was a pheasant. Robert said, don't swerve. It's dangerous. Wham! She killed the pheasant.
Oh, wow. That's definitely.
I felt very, very bad. Yes. So those little things we deal with that every day. Human beings do without a second thought. You know, all those thousands of incidents. You know, I mean, the one with the man weeing out of the window, or out of the door, stayed in my memory because it was so. But you know, the amount of times I've seen the most extra and stuff falling off trucks and.
Yeah,
you know, caravan. Actually, in Australia, I was driving along a freeway, and a caravan suddenly went right across the road on its own, and the car carried on. It just come unhooked, just sailed off into the bush. That was pretty extreme.
Yeah, we have had some. I mean, some really funny ones where when people get to a ford and like there is water in it, and they don't necessarily manage to identify what's the depth. And then somebody get their husbands to get out of the car and kind of go in with their willies to kind of check the depth. And you know, and our service vehicle can't do that. I don't know what I would do if the vehicle was like, please, could you get out and check? But but yeah, I mean, so that definitely has some challenges.
The potential long-term solution, though, with autonomous vehicles. I mean, there's been so many discussions. One of the things we're hopefully seeing next year is a trial of a vehicle that you do drive yourself, but you don't have to go and get it. So, i.e., it comes to you with no one in it. And then you get in and drive it. And that's a kind of insurance. It's the first step in a way. But in fact, at the moment, those cars are being driven by a remote driver or pilot who can see everything that the car sees and they drive it. So they're trying it out like that. But the potential of some system like that is, say you live in, I don't know, Bermondsey, Greenwich, Catford, and you don't have a car, but you need one that morning. So you book it. It's not coming from just down the street. It's coming from a huge hub outside London where there is the facilities to charge it, where there is the batteries and the solar and the wind, and it's on an industrial. It's not where people live. And this car wakes up, opens up, goes up, comes to your house. You get in it, whatever, either it drives you or you drive it. All those issues about charging on the street, about having our streets back. I mean, that's what you see, as you all know, in the Netherlands, in the places that have really pushed is beautiful streets with no cars. And you go, God, I can just about remember less cars. I can't remember no cars, but but you still can use a car when you need it. Strikes me as a really better solution than cramming our streets with.
And maybe that car is a minibus, and
it could be a minibus,
and a couple of people up on the street, and then you even have fewer vehicles, and I think that's also kind of going to be some of the key things. And kind of maybe I wanted to add as well is that there are also people who need transportation to get to places. Like there are lots of people with maybe with disabilities or people who are trying to get to a hospital, or people who are trying to get to work and they don't have easy transport options. So I think that's another challenge that we are looking to solve, is how you find right solutions for people. I mean, number of trips as age goes really decreases, and that leads to people kind of often being very alone. So providing people with travel options can really increase kind of people's life satisfaction and health eventually. So that's something that I think we need to also just look at and see how we can help it.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. I'm going to put all the links to what you're doing in the show notes for this episode, because it's really impressive what you're doing, and it's a big. I mean, you're not going to run out of work. I'll say that for you. You're not going to wake up in 2 years' time and go, well, we've sorted that out completely.
I mean, we'd love to, but kind of what I kind of say these days is that in 10 years, when you will look at a city, just like you look at Utrecht, it's like, again, they did really well with cycling and car sharing. Like there will be cities where you look at in 10 years and say, oh, these guys did really well with the whole EV transition. They have chargers exactly at the right places. They don't have too many, so all the ones that they have are used. But their network is very resilient. They don't have power. Like it really just functions. and then you might have others where it just doesn't really feel quite right.
Yeah.
And then the ones that would be good, if you will do a case study of them, they will not say, "Oh, we just did it. Like it just happened."
Yeah. Just happened. Yeah.
They will probably say that, yeah, we thought about it. We tried to work with everybody relevant. We tried to include all the right stakeholders to bring it together. And I think that's what I think we're trying to really encourage and really do, to see how you can solve these big challenges strategically, so that they work really well by the time you get to 2030.
Well, thank you so much. I've got loads of other things I want to ask you about, but I'm trying not to go over the hour, and we're very close. But that was thank you so much for spending the time with us today. And I want you, please come back to the Fully Charged Plus podcast at some point. Well, it'd be great to get a few, maybe an update to see how things are going, and we should come to Greenwich at some time and see what's going on there. It's been on my list for a long time, places to come. I want to cycle down there.
Thank you very much for having me, and absolutely, it would be great to have you in Greenwich, and I'm sure we can find some cool things to show you as well.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Balazs. Well, I hope you really enjoyed that. It was a brilliant conversation. I do really want to get Balazs to come to Fully Charged Live to do more podcasts about this topic. They're developing lots of projects that that we didn't discuss today, and there's a lot more going on. But it's intriguing that Greenwich Council, in particular, in South East London, just doing amazing stuff. Anyway, that's all. Don't want to waffle on. Do remember that we're doing Fully Charged Live in Amsterdam in March next year. We're doing Fully Charged Live in the UK at Farnborough at the end of April. And then we're very busy organising Fully Charged Live USA in San Diego in September of 2022. And I'll just mention in passing, because that is a little bit further ahead, Fully Charged Live Down Under in Sydney. Old steak and kidney there. And that is in March of 2023. And certain people are looking forward to that a great deal. I may be one of them. Anyway, that's all for now. Please do subscribe. Do tell your friends. Do all the usual lovely things, because you're all lovely and wonderful. And I'm so pleased that there are people who have subscribed to this podcast and do listen to them, and we get comments back, and it's fabulous, and we appreciate it. Thank you very much. That's all. As always, if you have been, thank you for listening.